The wind howled across the open land of the Wild West, carrying dust, snow, and silence together. The sun had fallen behind the tall red rocks, and darkness had started to swallow the desert. A lonely cowboy named Eli Turner rode his tired horse across the frozen trail. He had been traveling for days, searching for a small town where he could rest and find work. But luck had not been on his side. His food was gone, his horse was weak, and the cold air was sharper than a knife. As the storm grew stronger, Eli pulled his coat tight around his shoulders. The wind pushed against him so hard that he could barely see what was ahead. His fingers were stiff, his lips dry, and his breath came out in small white clouds. Every mile felt longer than the one before it. He tried to hum a tune to keep himself awake, but the sound of the wind swallowed every note. The Wild West could be cruel, and tonight it was showing no mercy. Soon his horse stumbled and fell to its knees. Eli jumped off quickly and patted the animal's neck, trying to comfort it, but he knew the poor creature couldn't go any farther. "You rest here, old friend," he whispered softly. The horse lay still, exhausted and cold. Eli took his saddlebag and began to walk, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The storm became worse. Snowflakes flew into his eyes, and the wind cut through his clothes. He could hardly move his legs, and the thought of giving up crossed his mind. But deep inside, something told him to keep going. Maybe there was a chance, maybe someone out there had a fire burning. So he kept walking, step after step, though his body screamed for rest. After what felt like hours, Eli noticed a faint orange light far away between two cliffs. At first he thought it was a trick of his tired eyes, but as he looked again, the glow flickered like fire. His heart jumped. A fire meant people, and people meant shelter. He gathered his last bit of strength and started toward the light. The snow whipped around him, making it hard to move. Each step was heavy, but the hope of warmth pushed him forward. As he came closer, he could see a small shelter made from animal hides stretched over a wooden frame. A thin line of smoke rose from a fire just outside. He hesitated for a moment, wondering who lived there. In those lands, a stranger could be seen as a threat. But the cold left him no choice. He took one more step, then another. Suddenly, a voice called out through the wind, clear, strong, and full of concern. "Cowboy, we are shivering. Get in my shelter now." Eli stopped in surprise. The voice belonged to a woman. He turned his head toward the sound and saw her standing near the fire. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, her dark hair blowing in the wind and her eyes watching him closely. He could tell from her clothing and the designs on her blanket that she was Apache. For a moment, Eli didn't move. He had heard many stories from other settlers, stories filled with fear and misunderstanding about the Apache people. But right now, all he saw in her eyes was kindness. His body was shaking, his legs weak, and before he could speak, she stepped forward and pointed to the shelter again. "Come," she said simply, her tone firm but caring. Eli nodded slowly and walked toward her. The warmth from the fire touched his face as he got closer. The woman moved aside, letting him duck into the small shelter. Inside, the air was smoky but warm. A small fire burned in the center, and beside it lay a young boy, maybe 10 years old, wrapped in a blanket. His face looked pale and tired, but his eyes opened curiously when he saw Eli. The woman entered behind him and spoke softly to the boy in her own language. The boy nodded and scooted closer to the fire. Then she turned to Eli and gestured for him to sit. "You cold," she said in simple English. "Sit warm." Eli nodded gratefully and sat down. The heat from the fire felt like heaven. His hands trembled as the blood returned to them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I thought I'd freeze out there." The woman gave a small smile and handed him a fur blanket. "Storm strong," she said. "You stay till sun." Her name, he soon learned, was Nayeli, and the boy was her younger brother, Taza. They had been out gathering herbs for their village when the storm came suddenly. Now they were waiting for the weather to calm before returning home. Eli listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. Her English was simple but clear. He could tell she was trying her best to communicate. He admired her courage. Helping a stranger, especially a cowboy, was not something most would do in those days. As the fire crackled, Nayeli handed him a small piece of roasted corn and a wooden cup of warm broth. Eli hesitated, feeling guilty to take food from them when they didn't have much themselves. But she nodded again, insisting. "Eat," she said, strong again. He took a bite and warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't much, but it felt like a feast after the long, cold journey. The boy Taza watched him closely, studying his hat and boots. Eli smiled gently at him. "Thank you, young man," he said. The boy didn't answer, but his lips curved into a shy smile. Outside, the storm continued to roar. The sound of the wind mixed with the steady rhythm of the fire's crackle. Inside the shelter, 3 strangers sat close, sharing silence and warmth. Eli leaned against the wall, feeling his eyelids grow heavy. For the first time in days, he felt safe. As the night deepened, Nayeli added more wood to the fire. Her eyes stayed alert, as if guarding her small family and the stranger she had let in. She glanced at Eli, who had fallen asleep sitting up, the fur blanket around his shoulders. She could see how tired he was. The lines on his face, the cracks on his hands, the story of hard travel written all over him. Something in her heart told her she had done the right thing. Helping him was not just an act of kindness. It was a duty of humanity. When morning came, the storm had quieted. The world outside was white with snow, soft and silent. Eli woke to the gentle smell of burning wood and the faint sound of Taza humming a tune. The shelter felt warm, almost peaceful. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw Nayeli kneeling by the fire, grinding herbs in a small wooden bowl. She looked up and smiled softly. "You sleep long," she said. Eli stretched and rubbed his eyes. "I think you saved my life," he replied. She looked at him for a moment, then said simply, "We all same under sky." Those words touched him deeply. In that simple sentence, she had said something truer than any long speech could. They were from different worlds, raised with different beliefs, but in that storm, none of it mattered. All that mattered was survival, warmth and kindness. He helped her gather wood outside the shelter, careful not to step on the soft snow too loudly. Together, they rebuilt the small fire pit and checked on the horse, which had somehow survived the night near a rock wall. Eli smiled in relief and thanked her again. That night had changed something inside him. The world had taught him to fear the unknown, but now he had seen a different truth. Compassion could live even in the harshest lands, even among those the world called different. As the morning sun rose over the red cliffs, shining through the white snow, Eli looked at Nayeli and her brother. He didn't know what the rest of his journey would bring. But one thing was certain. He would never forget the woman who said, "Cowboy, we are shivering. Get in my shelter now." It wasn't just an invitation into her home. It was a call to remember that kindness in any language can save a life. The next morning, the Wild West looked peaceful and calm. The storm had passed, leaving behind a white blanket of snow across the desert ground. The sun rose slowly over the cliffs, spreading light that made the snow sparkle like silver dust. Eli Turner stepped outside the small shelter, breathing in the cold, fresh air. His body still ached from the long journey, but his heart felt lighter. He turned to look back at the shelter where Nayeli and her younger brother, Taza, were packing their small belongings. The smoke from the dying fire curled into the sky. Everything felt quiet, almost sacred. For the first time in many days, Eli didn't feel alone. Nayeli came out carrying a small basket of dried herbs. She smiled when she saw him awake. "Storm gone," she said softly. "Now, son." Eli nodded and smiled back. "Yes, the sun's back. You saved me, Nayeli. I owe you my life." She shook her head gently. "No debt," she replied. "Spirit guide you here. We only share fire." Her words were simple, but they carried a deep meaning. Eli didn't argue. He simply felt thankful. Thankful that kindness still existed in a land that was often cold and unforgiving. As they sat by the fire to warm their hands, Eli noticed that the young boy, Taza, kept staring at his hat and boots again. Eli laughed softly and handed the boy his hat. "Here, try it," he said kindly. Taza's eyes lit up with excitement. He placed the hat on his small head. It was too big and it slid down to his ears. Nayeli laughed quietly for the first time since Eli had met her. Her laughter sounded warm, like music carried by the morning wind. After breakfast, Nayeli stood and looked toward the far hills. "Our village that way," she said, pointing to the east. "We go when sun high," Eli nodded. "And I'll head west toward Red Rock Town. I was hoping to find work there before the storm caught me." They both fell silent for a while, listening to the sound of melting snow dripping from the rocks. Then Nayeli said gently, "West far. You alone?" Eli looked down, his face thoughtful. "Yes, been alone a long time," he said quietly. "Lost my family years ago. Been drifting since then. I guess the road became my only home." Nayeli studied him with kind eyes. "Road long but not empty," she said. People walk same sky. Sometimes path cross for reason. Eli smiled faintly. Maybe you're right. Maybe that's why I ended up here. For the next few hours, they worked together. Eli helped fix a broken piece of the shelter's frame and gathered more firewood for Nayeli before he left. Taza followed him everywhere, asking questions in his language, pointing to Eli's saddlebag and boots, curious about the cowboy's world. Eli tried to answer with gestures, sometimes laughing at their small misunderstandings. It felt good to have company again. The simple warmth of shared laughter filled the quiet air. By noon, the sky was clear and blue. Nayeli packed the last of her things while Eli prepared to set off on his journey. He tightened his saddle, fed his horse, and took one last look around the canyon. It felt strange to leave. He had only been there for a short time, but it felt like a small piece of peace in his long, wandering life. When everything was ready, Nayeli walked up to him holding something in her hands. It was a small bracelet woven from red and white threads tied together with care. "Take," she said softly. "Keep safe. Apache way. Red for life, white for peace." Eli looked at it, touched. "You made this?" She nodded. "Yes, when someone help, we give gift. You fix shelter, help fire. You friend," he smiled, deeply moved. "Then I'll wear it always," he promised, slipping it around his wrist. "And I'll remember this place." "And you?" Nayeli looked down shyly. "You remember sun, not storm," she said. "Remember kindness." Eli hesitated for a moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an old silver button. It was the only piece left from his father's coat, a keepsake he had carried for years. He pressed it into her hand gently. "This was my father's," he said quietly. He always said, "When you meet someone who shows real courage, you give them a piece of your luck. I want you to have it." Nayeli looked at the small silver button resting in her palm. It shone softly in the sunlight. Her eyes lifted to meet his, full of gratitude. "I keep," she said simply. "To remember you." Taza ran up, waving his small hand. "Goodbye, cowboy," he said in broken English, his voice full of innocence. Eli bent down and shook his little hand warmly. "Goodbye, little warrior," he replied with a grin. As the afternoon sun rose higher, they parted ways. Nayeli and Taza walked east toward the hills, while Eli rode west, his horse's hooves leaving soft prints in the snow. He turned once to wave, and Nayeli lifted her hand in return before disappearing behind the rocks. The road ahead was long and silent, but Eli felt a strange comfort in his heart. The red and white bracelet around his wrist reminded him that goodness still existed, even in the most unexpected places. Days passed as Eli traveled across the plains. The snow slowly melted and the warm winds of early spring began to blow. Sometimes when he stopped to rest by a campfire, he looked at the bracelet and thought of Nayeli's words, "We all same under sky." They echoed in his mind, soft and true. In Red Rock Town, Eli found work at a small ranch, helping repair fences and care for horses. Life was simple again, but something inside him had changed. He no longer saw the world as a place divided by race or name. He saw people, just people, all struggling, all hoping, all living under the same wide sky. Months later, when travelers came through town, they often shared stories from the nearby lands. One evening, an old trader mentioned an Apache woman who had helped a lost soldier survive the desert cold. Eli's heart stirred. He smiled quietly, knowing it must be Nayeli. He didn't say anything, but that night as he sat by his campfire, he took out the silver button's twin, the one he had kept for himself. He rubbed it gently between his fingers, watching the firelight dance on its surface. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Nayeli." Years passed. The world around him changed. The railroads grew, towns expanded, and the old ways began to fade. But Eli never forgot that cold night in the canyon, or the woman who opened her shelter to a stranger. Even when he grew older, with gray in his hair and slower steps, he still wore the red and white bracelet. People often asked him about it, and he always smiled before answering. "It was given to me by a brave Apache woman," he would say. "On a night when the storm tried to take my life, she saved it. And she taught me something no book or preacher ever could, that kindness is the truest language of all." He became known around those parts as the cowboy who survived the snowstorm. Children loved hearing his story, and every time he told it, his eyes softened, his voice calm and full of feeling. Meanwhile, far away in the Apache village, Nayeli kept the silver button safely tied to her necklace. Whenever she touched it, she remembered the cowboy with gentle eyes and a thankful heart. She often told her people, "The world is wide, but hearts can meet anywhere." And so, their paths never crossed again, but their kindness stayed alive, like two stars shining far apart, yet glowing under the same endless sky. Even years later, when people spoke of the Wild West and its dangers, Eli's story was different. It wasn't about gunfights or battles. It was about warmth, courage, and a simple act of humanity that crossed every boundary. He often said to those who listened, "The night I met Nayeli, I didn't just find shelter from the storm. I found the truth that kindness can live anywhere, even in the wildest of places." And with that, the cowboy and the Apache woman's story became a quiet legend, told around fires and camps for generations. A story not of war or fear, but of friendship, compassion, and the power of a single act of grace in a cold and lonely land.